everyone, it's Bernadette Joy, and we're here for another episode of the Burn Book Club, and I am here live at PodFest in Orlando with my new friend,
John Miles. Bernadette, so nice to meet you, and what a fantastic event this is.
Right? I'm so excited to be here because I get to be in this space with other thought leaders like you, and full confession, I had reached out to John PodFest, and I saw that he had this amazing book, and it was very much aligned to the kinds of things that I'm talking about in Crush Your Money Goals, and so I did a bold move and said, hey, I would love to have a conversation with you to learn more about what's in the book and maybe tips that you have for this audience.
Awesome.
Yes.
I can't wait to do it.
So for people who don't know who you are, could you just tell people who you are, what you do, and then since your book is about passion struck, like what's your passion?
Historically, I was a military veteran who went into the business world, and I had executive roles earlier in my career at Lowe's, Dell, more recently in private equity owned companies like Catalina Marketing. But along that journey, I just found as if I was doing something at the time that I felt passionate about, but I didn't really feel like I was utilizing my talents in a way that was serving others. And I reached this point that Henry David Thoreau termed quiet desperation, where I felt like I was going into work, I was like doing the motions, but I didn't really feel like what I was doing mattered, and that it was having an impact the way I wanted to. So I eventually took a step back and really thought about how I had been living my life, and what I realized, like so many people today, I was so caught up in the constant grind of achieving that I wasn't focused on the right things, such as cultivating the relationships and making them a key component of my life, trying to focus on emotional and spiritual health along with physical and mental health, and balancing all those different elements.
Right.
And so I really wanted to teach others how do you start getting intentional about the choices that you make in life so that you can also build a life that really matters. And so that's what led me to creating the podcast, and that's what the book is really about.
I love that. Tell people more about your podcast because it's quite impressive. You've had quite a few downloads.
Well, I think the thing I love about the podcasting medium is that I interviewed a guest a few years ago named Jen Bricker Bauer. And if you haven't heard of her, Jen was born without legs and was born over in former Soviet Union bloc and ended up getting adopted by a family. And she told me during our interview, she wrote a book that's called Anything is Possible, which is a New York Times bestseller. But she told me one of the things her mom told her, in addition to Jen, anything is possible, is that all you need to think about in life is making an impact to one person, because it can really create a ripple effect. And to me, that's what podcasting is all about. I think if you're going into it to make money, you're going into it to create like a huge audience, you're going into it for the wrong reason. So I went into it because I started to want to make an impact one life at a time. And the really cool thing about the medium is that you can do it because it's a one-on-one relationship between you and the audience that you're cultivating. So that is why I'm here. Because I love the medium. It's a growing one. In fact, I was at a session yesterday that showed that it is one of the fastest growing mediums that there is.
Yes, that's right.
And that now 95% of people in America have heard of a podcast, 75% have listened to one, and 54% have listened to one in the last month.
Wow, that's a lot higher than I would have thought.
And what I thought surprising is I figured that the fastest growing demographic was 18 to 34, and they were for a while, but since COVID, 34 to 54 has been the fastest growing medium. It just tells me that you can really cultivate a powerful community, and you can do it by being intentional.
I love that. I had no intention of monetizing a podcast or anything like that, but I started my podcast back in 2018 simply because I had so many people reaching out to me to ask me how I paid off all of this debt. And people kept asking me for cups of coffee, and I was telling my husband one day, I'm getting tired of going for these coffee dates. I wish I could just record my response to people. He said, that's called a podcast. And so that's how we started. And now 7 seasons later and a book and a business around it, I found that my real reason was always to serve people one-on-one. And so I agree with you 100%. That's nice to hear that there's someone else that feels similarly about it.
Yeah, and people ask me all the time, how in the world is your podcast doing 30 million plus downloads a year? And I sometimes think people don't want to hear the true answer, which is
Ooh.
you have to be intentional about everything that you're doing. And so as I was coming up, I went into this without an ego. And I think you really have to be humble about how you're approaching it, because I wanted to learn everything about it. So for me, that meant for the first 3 years I was doing it, I did everything.
That's right. Are you enjoying this content? Well, if you are ready to level up and actually start taking real action towards crushing your money goals, check out my new book. It is Crush Your Money Goals, 25 habits that you can start today to pay off debt, to save and invest. It's all of my best secrets as a debt-free millionaire, jam-packed into one book for just $18. So you can find more at crushyourmoneygoals.com or head to Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, wherever books are sold, or better yet, check out your local bookstore.
I figured out, how do you interview people? How do you do the research? How do you go about finding your guests? How do you beg the guests to come on the show? How do you reach out to advertisers? All of it. How do you produce it? How do you edit it? And I think because of that, and because I listened to myself and I saw how I was performing, I was my own worst enemy.
Yes.
And I would critique myself and motivate myself to do better. And I think that's how I got better. And these people who jump into it with a whole team behind them,
Immediately.
you can have success. For me, really like that I had the foundation of really knowing what it took to build it from scratch.
I love that. I agree with you. I think a lot of people go in immediately say, like, let me get the best camera, let me get the production team, let me spend all this money, but they don't have the content and they don't have necessarily wherewithal to decide, okay, where do I want to spend my time and energy on this?
Yes.
And so you honed that, and you said for 3 years.
For 3 years. So I edited personally the first 400 episodes.
Wow.
And it's crazy because you see how many filler words you're using.
Oh, yeah.
You look at, I could have asked this question differently. How could I have guided this conversation to a different destination? And through that, I've gotten better and better and better at knowing how to interact with the guests that I have on the show. And more importantly, how do I create an authentic message in my solo episodes that I'm really not talking at the listeners, but I'm trying to bring the listeners into a story and then teaching them how to learn from that story.
I love that so much. And I think a lot of what you're saying not only applies to podcasting, but pretty much to any passion type of thing, whether it's a hobby or it's something that you're working on as a business, to say, okay, well, where can I do the reps and where can I look for areas of improvement and where can I set my ego aside to say, all right, I wasn't great at this. Let me try again, So I love that so much. Now, I started reading your book and I had a couple of questions for you because there are 3 lines you had in there that I thought were so powerful that I thought we could dive into a little bit more. So since we have the book here, the things that stuck out to me that I wanted to ask first, because I'm dealing with this in real time right now with my business coaching clients. So one of the things that I saw that struck me was the power to do something different. And what I'm finding is that a lot of my clients are like, oh, but I'm seeing what the industry is doing. I'm seeing what my peers are doing. And so they end up trying to copy what's going on versus what you talk about is, do you actually hone the willingness to go and do something different from what you're seeing? So I'd love for you to share more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on it from 2 different standpoints.
Okay.
So that power to do something different is part of the first chapter of the book. And in it, I really highlight the journey of Jim McKelvey. He might not be a household name, but he is actually one of the most successful entrepreneurs. He launched Square with Jack Dorsey. And talking to him is where I really honed this idea. When I started to hear from Jim, it led me on this adventure, so to speak, of what was one of the things that when you look at leaders like him, admirals, generals, professional athletes, is there something that differentiates them from everyone else? And Oprah Winfrey is a great example of this, who gave you a great endorsement. But what I found is that they are constantly reinventing themselves. And it led me to find some work by a gentleman, Dan Schwabel, who's a New York Times bestselling author. And I had looked at about 700 leaders. He looked at 1,200 across the different elements, and he found the same thing. And part of this reinvention is having the confidence and the ability to constantly learn something different. Now, it ties later into the way the book is organized, is I start off with mindset shifts, and then in the second part of the book, I go into behavior shifts. And one of the behavior shifts is the need to think with originality. And so, too often, people do what you're saying, is they copy things that other people are doing. And I think that there is a place for that. But to me, if you really want to do something boldly, I've always thought that you need to push the envelope.
Yes.
Meaning, when I was the CEO of a company in the health and natural food area, I created a new term for actionable data, actionable intelligence, I called it. Because the nice thing about it was I could drive people to go to a place that didn't exist, and I could create the space. Now, did I use elements of what people were already doing? Yes. But I built upon it, and I created something new, something that I could talk about, something that was different, something where I could own the term. And that's just a small way that you can do it. But today, with AI, automation, everything that is hitting people, if they don't learn this key principle, which is why I put it first, of having the power to know how to do something different, they're going to really fall behind. And you're not going to stay ahead by copying others.
Yes.
You're going to stay ahead by learning, figuring out how to adapt, and then leapfrogging in the future. And so Passion Struck is a great example of this, because the term, at first when I saw it and had the idea come in my mind, I was like, I'm not sure I can own this, because it was a perfume by Victoria's Secrets. But I went to GoDaddy and found, well, they don't own the domain name. They don't really own a slogan around it. So it's something I can build around. And that's what I did with the podcast and the book. And it is actually now the first search term when you go to Passion Struck.
I love that. You and I have a lot in common when it comes to the evolution. As I was going through your book, my book is similar structure to yours, is I start out with kind of mindset shifts first and then go to behavioral shifts. And I also have, at the end of each chapter, little exercises for people to do. And I love that you looked at this, because a lot of people would say, oh, it's already a perfume by Victoria's Secret, so I guess there's nothing I can do here. And you're like, well, let's find out. And same thing happened to me with Crush Your Money Goals. It evolved because someone else had crushed his debt first, and then I was like, well, what else can I do? And then it evolved to what it is now. So I love that story so much. All right, the second thing that I saw is you have a section in here called A Willingness to Act Without Knowing What's Ahead. I have several clients who have left their corporate jobs like you, and now they're going into this entrepreneurial phase, and they cannot seem to shake the idea that they are no longer stable because someone else isn't paying their paycheck. Even though because I'm their money coach, we made sure they had enough savings, enough runway, we have a viable business, but every month they throw themselves into a tizzy saying, well, I'm not getting a steady paycheck, so therefore I am unstable. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of a willingness to act without knowing what's ahead, especially for folks who have left corporate.
I am so glad I left corporate, and I'm going to use the word awesome to be able to control what you do on a daily basis in the way that you want to do it, to give you a foundation. So I know a big thing for you was, how do you take yourself out of debt? Imagine that not only am I leaving my corporate life behind, but I've just gone through a devastating divorce where at the end of this divorce, we couldn't come to an agreement, and finally the other side came to me with this proposal that they're willing to move forward if I give them 95% of what I own.
Wow.
In Florida, where I live, the divorce laws are pretty strict. If you've been married for over, I think it's 17 years, which we were, your spouse gets permanent alimony. So she says to me, if she gets remarried in the next 5 years, it's the most stupid decision you've ever made. But if she doesn't, it's the smartest decision you will ever make. And I thought about it as we were in the mediation, and I just thought, I have built this before. I have confidence in myself that no matter what's ahead of me, if I've done it once, I can do it again, and I can do it in a much bigger way. So I think one of the first things I would say to these people is you have to have self-belief and know that what you did in the corporate world can translate somewhere else. But you also have to give yourself grace. You didn't become a director, a vice president, a C-level overnight. For me, it took years. And the same thing is going to come with your entrepreneurial journey. It's not going to come overnight. And so what you really have to do is to recognize the steps along the way. And I think a big mistake people make, and it's a core theme throughout this book, is if you want to create a life of significance, it all starts and ends with the intentional choices that you make every single day. And what people end up doing is they don't think about the micro, they think about the macro. And that's where they get it wrong, because people try to take these macro steps and then it doesn't go the way that they want it. And what I have taken is more of the approach. I use something that's in the book called the deliberate action process, where I adapted the principles that people use in agile development to my own development. So how can you start making smaller actions over a much more condensed time period to test your theories out in a way that you're not sacrificing huge losses, but you can do quick changes if you find a path isn't working. And that has been one of the core elements of my success is I take a small move, I test it out to see if it worked or not, and then I learn and go in and keep building and building and building. And the best analogy I can give you is it's as if you're driving a car and imagine you don't have a smartphone. And all of a sudden...
That was a long time ago
and
for me.
And all of a sudden you run out of gas. And you've got really two options. You can either go behind your car and start pushing it, or you can try to flag someone down for help. Well, let's say you take that action where you are going to start pushing the car. Well, when you start pushing it, you are running into a ton of resistance. And it takes an amazing amount of momentum to get it going. But once you do, all of a sudden, the car starts moving down the road, and what feels like an uphill suddenly feels like you're hitting a glide path, and then you hit a downhill. To me, it's the same advice I would give to these people that you're asking about, is it is going to be extremely difficult, like pushing that car or trying to push a boulder up a hill. But if you are very deliberate about the actions and choices that you're making, you're going to start moving that inch by inch, and then over time it's going to get moved a few meters,
That's right.
a few miles, and that's how you've got to think about your journey. I didn't build Passion Struck in one day. I didn't start making the downloads or money that it is overnight. It took years. And that's the way that they've got to approach this. Some people get lucky and they do it much quicker.
Yes.
But for the vast majority of us, that's not how it happens.
Exactly.
So you can't get discouraged. You've got to go back to what you were saying before. You've got to hone into that mission that you've been called to do. You've got to believe in it. You got to recognize and reward yourself for the incremental progress you're making. And then you have got to keep that purpose front and center. But more importantly, why are you doing it? If you're doing it solely to make money, just like we talked about with the podcast, it's going to be a lonely ride. But if you're doing it to impact other people's lives, I promise you it's going to be a very worthy cause. Even if you don't reach the same financial success that you did in the corporate world, you're going to have so many other rewards that make it so much more worthwhile.
I love the analogy, first of all, and I had a specific example with a client recently. She was saying, I really want to write a newsletter, like a weekly newsletter. And I said, okay, well, before we do that and commit to this now giant commitment, why don't you just write the first 3 and see what happens after the first 3? Maybe you'll find the topics that you really like doing. Maybe you'll write the first 3 and realize you hate this process. And so rather than committing to like the macro, like you said, find the micro thing that you can do right now and iterate along the way, which is something that a lot of people struggle with, is that they want to get to the macro thing faster, but they're not willing to do the micro things to get there. So last question I have for you is, obviously you have been very accomplished. You've done some amazing things and impacted so many lives. Is there still something that you're looking forward to, something that you haven't done yet that you want to do?
Yeah, I am actually really excited. I'm in the middle of writing my next book, and I've written
Wow.
a children's book, and both of these are really focused on this whole concept of belonging. So I'm going to take you back. So I remember I'm leaving my senior executive role at Lowe's Home Improvement, and I had just accepted a job at Dell. And I started to get this message from, whether you want to say it's God or the universe, or that I was supposed to start helping. The words I was given were the lonely, the helpless, the bored, the battered of the world. And as this business executive, I'm hearing those words going, what in the world is this? So as I started to think more and more about it, I started to see that the loneliness epidemic, the hopelessness epidemic,
Yes.
they're symptoms of something greater. And
Yes.
that is, too many people today are impacted by the disease of disconnection. We are not only disconnected from one another, more importantly, we are disconnected from our own selves. And so to me, how do you, as we have shifted in society from having these support structures in place where we felt significant, where we felt that others recognize that, to now this global village that we live in where all those structures are gone. And so that is what I'm writing about. So what Passion Struck, the first book, does is it really tells you, how do you create a life of significance? What are steps that you can take regardless of your age to create a life where you feel like you matter? And now I'm really going into, what is a framework that companies, if you're a CEO of a company, the head of a nonprofit, an individual in their own life, how do you replace these core structures that are missing in society to develop a mattering movement, so to speak, so that we can get rid of employee disengagement and fix it. We can help 54% of people right now in America feel lonely. I want to help solve that. And I think through the podcast and through the book, I can make a small dent in it, and hopefully it becomes a larger dent. My big goal is to help 10 million people feel like they matter in life, and to give them the blueprint for how do you do it. So that is what I'm really excited about.
Thank you so much for taking time with me. I really appreciate it.
Bernadette, it was such an honor to be here, and I want to congratulate you, because being in debt, having financial struggles, I mean, there's nothing worse. I remember there were so many days when I gave all that money away and it wasn't coming back, that I just sat there and at times cried. I remember being on my knees saying, what did I do? Because when you don't have that security blanket, it is really, really scary. So I think you've brought something beautiful in the world where you're helping people to overcome that and to learn how they can guide their financial freedom, which is a huge thing. And so I really think our books in many ways complement each other.
I think so too.
So I'm so glad you reached out, and I hope our episode today impacts one person, because that's what we're here to do.
I love that. So if you want to be one of the 10 million that he helps, where can people find you?
So if you want to learn more about me and my personal journey, my website, rmiles.com, is the best place. And if you want to learn more about the book, the Passion Struck movement, and what we're doing, then Passion Struck.
See what happens when you just get out of your comfort zone and reach out to new people. So if you like this episode, stay tuned for more of the Bird Book Club. And if you're not already subscribed, check out the button here, and we'll put the links to all of the resources in the description. Bye.
Bye.